Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm DJ Gherkin, Executive Director here at the Southern Environmental Law Center. Over the next hour, you'll hear from SELC experts how we're partnering with communities, organizations, and state leaders to protect clean air and clean water, to safeguard our communities, and to defend our natural treasures. From Congress to state legislatures, and from federal court to local planning boards, SELC is charting a path forward. Let's be honest. If you care about our environment, if you care about the health of our communities, if you care about the rule of law, taking in the morning news these days can feel like an act of courage. You'd be forgiven for losing some hope. We're already feeling the effects across the South of funding freeze and staffing cuts, and a second Trump administration that is determined to break down our bedrock environmental laws. But here's the truth. No one voted for dirty air and dirty water. Southerners across the political spectrum expect their government to hold polluters accountable, to protect our natural treasures, and to protect the health of our communities. This last election was not a mandate to pollute our rivers with forever chemicals or auction off our public lands. Here at SELC, we're fighting back in courtrooms, in the halls of government, and in communities across the South. Rooted here in the South, and with deep expertise in law and in this region, we're ready for the challenges ahead. SELC has doubled the size of its legal team since the first Trump administration. Today, with 135 legal and policy experts and new litigators joining us as we stretch to meet this moment, we're one of the most powerful environmental nonprofits in the nation. Our staff, all those people, like all of you, love this region and feel called to act. And we are. We will. We will confront polluters when agencies fail to do so. We'll hold the federal government accountable to the law, and drawing on 4 decades of expertise, we will continue to make progress here in the South. Critically, as we do that work together, as we all stand together to defend our communities, our environment, and the laws that protect them, we will, at the same time, remind our neighbors what we have in common. We will show them what is at stake, and we will inspire them to join us to defend it. To help you see why we're hopeful that we will continue to make progress and our plan for standing up in this moment, we're going to take you to locations across the South on the front lines so you can see what our SELC experts are doing. First, we'll go to Birmingham, Alabama, where community members are standing up with help from SELC, taking the law into their own hands to enforce the Clean Air Act against polluters, even as we at SELC gear up to defend that law from rollbacks. Then we'll jump to Tennessee, where a bipartisan coalition secured stronger protections for the Duck River, one of the most biodiverse rivers in the world. After those segments, I'll be joined by our program director, Jeff Gisler, and we'll talk about how SELC is stepping in to enforce environmental laws, confronting plans to dismantle them, and rallying support for the next wave of environmental progress. We'll have time for your questions, so if you have any, please drop them into the Zoom chat box. Our goal today is simple. We want to renew your hope in our environmental future by showing you real progress is happening right now, even now, across the South. And we want to inspire you to spread the word that the Trump administration's reckless plans for our environment are just that, plans. They don't become a reality until they get through all of us and face accountability from Southern communities who did not vote for this. Thank you for joining us to learn more about how we're working together to protect our environmental future and continue to drive progress forward across the South. I'll see you soon.
I would say that the Clean Air Act impacts every single person's life in Birmingham on a daily basis, whether they know it or not. My name is Sarah Stokes, and I'm a senior attorney based in our Alabama office. So to understand Birmingham, you have to understand the founding of Birmingham. We had 3 essential ingredients here to make steel: limestone, coal, and iron ore. Birmingham was called the Magic City because it sprang up overnight because of those 3 things. But there was an ugly side to the magic. We were also called Smoke City and Pittsburgh of the South. That's because of the pollution from the steel and iron industry. We're at Vulcan Park, and Vulcan is the Roman god of fire and forge, which is very appropriate for the city of Birmingham. Unfortunately, with that fire and forge also came pollution. If we were in the 60s, we wouldn't be able to see any of this because it would all be obscured from the smoke and the smog. 1970, the Clean Air Act amendments were passed. And in 1971, we get a warm fall day. It's 80 degrees, and an inversion effect occurs where the heat traps the pollutants into the city. And that pollution just sat on Birmingham, so much so that people literally couldn't breathe at that time. So the Jefferson County Department of Health had to bring in EPA, and EPA went to the federal court, and the first time the Clean Air Act was used in federal court in United States history was here in Birmingham, and the judge issued an injunction against these polluters and told these polluters they had to stop. From that point on, you see pollutants decrease from the 1970s all the way to today. Particulate matter and ozone have decreased 78% since the passage of the Clean Air Act. Unfortunately, though, there's a caveat to that. Not everybody has the luxury of clean air. Birmingham was one of the worst segregated cities in the South. This map really demonstrates why certain people in Birmingham are still feeling the impact of industrial pollution. The areas in red are zoned for industry, and then there's some shaded areas, the only areas that African Americans were allowed to live. And the descendants of those people are the people that we're working with today. Everybody deserves to breathe clean air, no matter what their zip code. And that's what GAS mission is, and that is what we try to help them with as well. GAS stands for the Greater Alliance to Stop Pollution in Birmingham, and they were named after a group that did that exact thing in the 1970s. GASP is an incredibly important partner because their members are the eyes and the nose in the community that are feeling the main brunt of the pollution. And we have worked together for the last 15 years to monitor different areas in Birmingham. One is called ABC Coke, owned by Drummond, one of the most wealthy businesses in the entire state. Coke is a fuel to create the steel. There are only 14 Coke plants in the entire country. 2 of them are here in Birmingham, within 2 miles of each other. You can see ABC Coke in the background, and ABC Coke has been in existence for over 100 years. It operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it emits benzene and other carcinogens from its plant. Sometimes those are in violation of the Clean Air Act and in violation of their permit. It also emits sulfur dioxide and particulate matter. We know that those 2 pollutants in particular can cause asthma, cardiovascular disease, lung disease, and kids are not attending schools as frequently around Coke plants because their asthma flares up. Let me just give you a picture of what a Coke facility looks like. It's got hundreds of ovens where you're putting coal into the ovens. It heats all the impurities off the coal to create Coke. In order to operate a Coke plant, you can't just turn on and off your furnaces or else you warp the pipes. And so they have to operate all the time. And so the pollution is occurring all the time. Some of the problems with both of our Coke facilities here in Birmingham are the leaking ovens. If you have leaking ovens, you have that Coke oven gas leaking into the neighborhoods surrounding the Coke plants. That Coke oven gas is one of the most toxic pollutants according to EPA. We got involved with ABC Coke because we started to really understand that ABC Coke, owned by the Drummonds, were a big factor of the air pollution in North Birmingham.
People in parts of North Birmingham claim Coke plants in that area have negatively impacted their health.
ABC Coke had been misrepresenting how much benzene they were emitting. We stepped in and we were able to get a leak detection and repair program that will last the life of the plant. We were also able to convince the Jefferson County Department of Health to put all of its records, not just for ABC Coke, but all of the industries in the city on a public database. It has been a game changer because instead of having to ask the Department of Health for records about a certain industry, we now can just directly go on the public database and find the permit, find any inspection reports, find any violations that they've reported. The third thing we were able to obtain in the settlement is half of the money went back to the community.
The Jefferson County Board of Health is using more than $380,000 received in a settlement with ABC Coke. The health department plans to give that money to local charities and organizations.
That was GASP and SCLC and the people on the ground working really hard to create a good solution. Unfortunately, the current administration is rolling back dozens of air and water safeguards.
Rules were enacted seeking to suffocate our economy in order to protect the environment.
Under the Clean Air Act, the Biden administration established 9 standards to regulate hazardous air pollutants, mercury and arsenic, and a handful of other very hazardous pollutants. And the Trump administration has decided they want to roll back those safeguards. Why would anybody want to breathe dirtier air? In the meantime, the president has said, you don't want to wait for us to legally roll it back, just email us and we'll give you an exemption. And so that's what's happening is the worst polluters in our country are emailing the administration for an exemption, and they get it just like that. In fact, we know that Alabama Power has been given an exemption for their 2 coal-fired power plants in the state, and ABC Coke has applied for it. And so this is going to hurt the people on the ground. This is not just policy. This is people's lives. So continuing on from ABC Coke, we realized that benzene and naphthalene could be an issue at the North Birmingham Coke facility as well. We are in front of Bluestone Coke. The community is literally in the shadow of this plant. People came to live here because it was redlined, and these were one of the only places where African Americans could live. And we have people who have helped us with this case against Bluestone, Mr. Mabry, who has lived in his house for generations, and he grew up with his brothers and sisters, 14 of them, 7 of which now have cancer or have died of cancer. Kids would be in school and they would be breathing this toxic air from this Coke plant that's behind me. We came out here with GASP to put monitors to monitor for naphthalene and benzene, and the air was putrid and you could not breathe. So when the Jefferson County Department of Health inspected the plant, they found ovens that were completely leaking the coke oven gas that was so toxic. And they got so frustrated that they filed a complaint in state court. They don't often get frustrated. And so that was a hint to us that there was a serious problem at this plant. We intervened in that case on behalf of GAS, and when we did, we were able to get the highest fine that the Department of Health has ever obtained in their 105-year-long history. Most importantly, Bluestone shut down in this process.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sherry Jackson. We begin with a major shift for the Bluestone Coke plant in Birmingham. The company says it's halting its operations. CBS 42's investigative reporter.
If Bluestone ever reopens, which they have threatened or have promised to do, they will be required to put sulfur dioxide monitors on the fence line of Bluestone. They will be required to have bi-monthly audits of the plant, and they will be required to have a compliance plan to make sure that they were in compliance with the law. People that live close to the plant can now breathe, literally, a sigh of relief. Nobody voted for dirty air and dirty water, But the fact that this administration is cutting science, cutting the EPA that enforces the law, and rolling back the law, it's like a three-edged sword, if that is a thing. The EPA is really important here in Birmingham. It's important really across the country because the EPA ensures that federal environmental laws are enforced on the ground. So now when federal and state officials are lacking and don't have the funding to do the enforcement that is required under the Clean Air Act and to find violations, the community can act as a stopgap. GASP and SELC partnered together to bring Smoke School to the community to be trained and certified on reading smoke. For instance, if it's a certain thickness coming out of the stack, then it could be a permit violation. And so once you are certified, then you can find violations in the community. Thankfully, we see the community members stepping up to say, hey, that's potentially a violation. And now they know what is a violation because Smoke School has taught them. You know, SELC is going to be incredibly important in this time because as we see federal officials back up, we are stepping forward. But it's not just the legal aspect that makes the difference. With community members that are also going to the city council, also going to the health department, community involvement is what is going to save the day in this era.
When you are trying to do something as important, but also multifaceted as protect a beautiful river that's under a lot of development pressure, you need to collaborate. I think that's really important in the South, given what's happening at the federal level. I'm George Nolan, and I'm the director of SELC's Tennessee office in Nashville. You know, the Trump administration seems very, very hostile to any sort of environmental protections. When that's happening at the federal level, it's particularly important for there to be state-level environmental protections. So for environmental groups like SELC, who are firmly intent in doing what's necessary to protect our natural treasures, we need to be able to pivot using state law to protect our resources. I think the Duck River work is a good example of that. It's really one of the best rivers in the world. It starts in the east near Manchester, Tennessee, and basically flows south of Nashville from east to west. It goes through 7 different counties before ultimately emptying into the Tennessee River. It's beautiful. It is tremendously biodiverse.
We are in the headwaters of the Duck River at the Old Stone Fort State Archaeological Park, which is a beautiful place where the Duck and the Little Duck Rivers actually converge. The water moves fast through the river at this point. There's a lot of beautiful rushing waterfalls. It is one of the most pristine parts of the river system. It's also a gathering place for the local communities. The Duck River and its tributaries are enjoyed by more than 150,000 anglers and paddlers each year. So it really is the backbone of a thriving recreational economy. The river has more than 150 species of fish, more than 50 species of freshwater mussels, as well as hundreds of species of aquatic insects and other critters. In fact, there are several species of freshwater mussels found in the Duck and not anywhere else in the world.
Freshwater mussels aren't the most charismatic critters, but they're really important because they're filter feeders. They actually clean the water. There's certain species of mussels that can filter 50 gallons of water a day. The fact that all these mussels are present indicates that the river is in good shape. and the mussels are actually keeping it in good shape. Unfortunately, it's also a hotbed for development in Middle Tennessee. In 2024, the Duck River was listed by the organization American Rivers as one of the nation's most endangered rivers. And that's because of the intense pressure that the river is under from growing population in the area and the development pressure to pump more water out of the river.
No one is suggesting that people should curb their drinking water intake. There's plenty of water in this river to supply the surrounding communities with drinking water. But when we're in a severe drought, there are certain water uses like washing cars, watering lawns that need to be reduced in order to protect the river and protect the ecosystem in the river. Today, the river is fairly high. We've had recent hard rain. You can see water rushing over the Lillard Mill Dam, but it's not always that way.
Well, Tennessee's most biologically diverse river is in danger of becoming dry.
You can see how during times of low water and drought like we've seen lately, it's more like a gravel bed than a river, and the removal of water for neighborhoods and industry could ultimately be its demise.
There is a real risk that people will ruin the river by simply taking too much water out of it at the wrong time.
In 2024, the state issued water withdrawal permits to 7 utilities along the river, proposing to dramatically increase human water consumption from the duck. And when I say dramatically, I'm talking about another 22 million gallons a day. So about a 40% jump in human water consumption from the Duck River. And these draft permits didn't look good. They didn't have the important safeguards that we wanted them to contain. So we appealed those permits on behalf of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation in order to make them stronger. While that administrative litigation was pending, we had an intense drought.
This used to all be several feet underwater.
Where we're standing right now, we've drove a boat through here countless times.
Endangered mussels were dying on the river because the river was getting so dangerously low. But the local drought management plans, to the extent they existed at all, were not kicking in. And no one was doing anything to reduce water consumption. Many people along the river got very upset, particularly landowners that own land along the river and really cherish it.
We are very afraid to see it wither away to nothing like it is today.
We then had Tennessee's leading mussel biologist go to the river and actually retrieve and catalog all of the dead mussels, the hundreds and hundreds of dead mussels. He wrote a detailed report, which we then promptly provided to the state government and to all the water utilities. And it was apparent to many people that something needed to be done, something needed to change.
Hey everybody, standing here on the banks of the beautiful Duck River. I grew up.
The issue got on the radar of Governor Lee, who appears to have a genuine affinity for the Duck River.
That's why this is so important. That's why we have to work together, and we will work together to make sure that Tennessee stays the most beautiful state in America.
Ultimately, our permit appeals were settled. The state reduced how much water can leak into the ground unused. It required the development of written drought management plans, but the settlement didn't solve the whole problem. That's why Governor Lee's executive order is particularly important.
With all the growth in Middle Tennessee along the river, the future of that river is at stake. So on November 20th, Governor Bill Lee signed an executive order to preserve the Duck River and ensure its long-term sustainability.
I realized that it's a really big deal and a really good thing. Governor Lee's executive order created the Duck River Planning Partnership that includes stakeholders like the state of Tennessee, TVA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, water utilities, members of the Tennessee General Assembly, as well as several conservation organizations, including SCLC. I think Governor Lee's collaborative approach at this moment is particularly important, given what's happening at the federal level. What we're seeing from the Trump administration is just a full frontal assault on federal environmental protections all the way across the board. First of all, he's proposing to reduce the reach of the Federal Clean Water Act. He's proposing to remove drinking water restrictions that protect people from forever chemicals known as PFAS. And he's proposing rule changes that will allow our drinking water to be threatened by toxins in coal ash. Nobody voted for dirty air or dirty water, so there's no reason that any politician should not favor keeping our water and our air clean and our landscapes beautiful. There are important state-level measures that are taking place that don't necessarily depend on the feds to work. We're seeing it in North Carolina with the former governor's executive order to protect wetlands in that state. And also we're seeing it in Georgia, particularly in the Flint River watershed, in which there's a habitat conservation plan that's been developed through a stakeholder process, and that's heartening. Beautiful rivers, clean water is a bipartisan issue. Everybody wants those things. We need clean water. We need good rivers. So it's important as lawyers charged with standing up for our environment to be ready to take on those federal changes head on, but also use other tools in the toolbox to protect our resources in our various states. And that can include relying more on state laws to do that.
Welcome back. I hope those stories renewed your hope for our environmental future and gave you some insight into our strategy for making progress in the challenging years ahead. I'm joined by my colleague, Jeff Gisler, SELC's Program Director. Jeff, as folks will have seen in those segments, a big part of our strategy for the coming years is drawing on our expertise and our connections with communities across the South to continue making progress here. Of course, the other half of that strategy is standing up to the federal government as it tries to move us backwards. Now, as I think back to the lessons we learned in our hard-won experience in the first Trump administration, that work was litigation heavy, and it kind of fell into three themes. There was stepping in to fill the gap in enforcement when federal agencies stopped doing their job to hold polluters accountable. There was standing up to these destructive, illegal projects that never should have been approved, but got a rubber stamp because of political favoritism. And then ultimately, there was resisting this effort, this wave of rollbacks of the environmental protections that keep us all safe. I know you've been talking with all of our whole program team since before the election to get ready for this moment. What does our federal response look like?
So I think those are absolutely the right categories, and we're seeing some of that start to play out now. What is a little bit different this time is that there's absolutely nothing off limits. If this administration is bolder, they're taking actions that we didn't see the first time. And some of those include cutting staff at federal agencies, whether it's the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, or one of the things that has really affected me at a personal level, because I know some of the people that work there, is a recent announcement to wind down the Office of Research and Development at EPA. Those are some of the best scientists in the world. Those are the people we need if we're going to have strong environmental protections. And that's exactly why this administration is cutting those staff. Sure. And so we're going to see the effects of that play out in each of those three buckets that you mentioned. We are seeing changes in enforcement already. There were two cases that the EPA and Corps were prosecuting in eastern North Carolina for illegal wetland fills. Those have been stayed. They're not moving forward. We're not seeing more enforcement cases in the pipeline, and we are going to see enforcement drop off, in part because they don't have the staff to work up the enforcement cases. And in addition to cuts at the agencies, we're seeing the Department of Justice, the folks who used to enforce environmental laws, have left, or the numbers are significantly dwindled. And so we're stepping up in important ways. We have always done enforcement work. It's part of what we do. It's part of who we are. And you saw that in Sarah's piece about ABC Coke. We're looking for those chronic polluters. But we've hired some of those litigators who have left the federal government, and we're targeting them on finding these enforcement cases that the federal government's not bringing. We're also redirecting some of our existing staff to make sure that we can step in and fill that gap for those enforcement actions that are affecting communities in our region. We are certainly going to see an uptick in destructive projects. And I think we're going to have really two flavors. The first is one where people take the mood, like this do whatever you want approach.
Yeah,
and we're seeing that right now in Western North Carolina, where someone just decided, I want to start a mine. I'm going to dig in the side of this mountain. I don't care if there are state laws. I don't care if there are federal laws. I'm just going to do it. So that will happen. And then we're going to see these projects where there's political pressure to get things done, to get permits issued, at the same time that the staff has been significantly cut. So what we're going to see is we're going to see cut corners, and we're going to see the public eliminated from that process to get things moving faster. We're responding in two ways. First, we're relying on our partners. We've been doing this for nearly 40 years. We have an extensive set of partners throughout the region, hundreds of organizations. They are our eyes and ears from the tiny town in Western North Carolina to the coast of Alabama. And so we rely on those partners to see these projects when they come up, particularly when the federal government's not doing its job and bringing the public in. We're also using the Freedom of Information Act. It's a tool we have to exercise oversight on these agencies. Anyone can ask agencies to send them documents, and the agencies are legally obligated to do it. Now, we know that this administration is going to stonewall us. We've expected that. We've already filed 4 lawsuits to get records from agencies so we can get better insight into what they're doing and hold them accountable to the laws that they are failing to enforce. The last thing we're doing, and the last thing they're doing, that is really picking up now and will accelerate over the near term, is starting to whittle away at the protections for our air, for our water, for our public lands that we have in place. And you'll see that a lot of these announcements, when the administration announces these things, they present them as these great deregulatory efforts. They are mostly, you and I know as administrative lawyers, they're mostly plans to deregulate. They present it as a fait accompli to try to keep people from fighting, to present it as a done deal. We know it's not a done deal, and we're seeing that in a couple ways in our region. We've long fought to close coal plants because they're the dirtiest form of energy. They cause climate pollution. This administration is eager to extend coal plants and ignoring their pollution. They want, we've worked a long time to control mercury and other toxic air pollutants from coal plants. They want to relax those limits. So we're engaging on that. We've been fighting that fight for decades and we'll continue doing it. And so that's one example of the way that this administration is seeking to roll back basic protections for our health, that we're stepping in, we're going to continue to push back to maintain those protections.
One of the things that I recall, and I think we both expect going forward, one of the challenges of doing our job in a Trump administration is just the volume of litigation. It's not, I like to think we have high standards. I like to think our colleagues do excellent work all the time, but there's so much that's just patently illegal that is coming our way, imminently challengeable, and just the volume of meeting them where they are and having the capacity. So you mentioned we're hiring litigators. We're addressing that a couple ways. We're also coordinating with national peers and partners so that we're not duplicating efforts. We're covering as much territory as we can. And that science office closing, we know there's going to be less science available. Federal agencies aren't going to be out there documenting the destruction from destructive projects. They're not going to be out there finding the polluters and holding them accountable. So we and our partners are going to have to step into that gap. That means what we're doing to meet that is setting aside resources for that science work, for experts, for people to be on the ground. And it's already happened, right? Litigation has taken off. It'd probably be helpful to give folks just an update of our cases that are pending and are in progress already.
Right. Well, and the volume is part of the strategy, right? It's to try to create so much, wear people out. And so we're very selective in what are the things that are going to have the biggest impact, and what are the things where there's important Southern story where we can make this real, because sometimes it's hard to understand how these federal programs relate to real people. One of the ways that we're doing that now is when the administration came in, they froze all sorts of federal funding. That included environmental funding, grants that had been awarded to weatherize homes, to make communities more flood resilient, to install solar panels, to provide clean renewable energy. These were all community-led projects where the federal government had signed a contract with a community organization and promised to reimburse those organizations for money that they spent to make their communities a better place. This administration came in and said, we're not going to pay our bills, even though Congress directed it, and these are federally binding contracts. So we sued them. First for freezing the funds. We won in district court. And interestingly there, the administration didn't say, oh, what we did was illegal. It was legal. They just didn't even say that. They didn't defend it.
They know.
And they just said, well, this is not the right court for this to be heard. And so we won at the district court. That's on appeal. After freezing this funding, the administration went forward and just terminated grants for no reason other than they did not align with the president's priorities. We filed a class action case, the first class action case that we have filed, working with those partners that you mentioned and working and representing organizations across the country, municipalities across the country, seeking to renew or to reinstate more than 350 grants that will put federal dollars into projects that will make people's lives better. So those are two cases that we filed. One that I think that is on the horizon is this administration has proposed, going back to the regulatory changes, this administration has proposed to drastically weaken the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act is one of our most effective laws. Its goal is to keep species from going extinct and to recover them so that they are no longer threatened or endangered. It does that by protecting habitat. Because as we learn in elementary school, if an animal doesn't have the habitat that provides all of its basic needs, it will not continue to exist. So eliminating protections for habitat is the way to drive species to extinction. What this administration has proposed is to throw out all protection for habitat. So this would mean that a developer could go in and build a seawall on a beach where sea turtles nest. And as long as they don't kill the turtle, they can block that turtle from nesting, eliminate any potential for sea turtles to continue to reproduce, and drive that species into extinction. The administration has proposed that. We have objected to it. Our partners are objecting to it. If they choose to go forward with it, we will continue to fight them every step of the way.
Okay, there is no Endangered Species Act if we don't protect habitat. Yeah.
And so we've talked about different things happening at the federal level. One of the places where we have a lot of endangered species that I know we talked about last year in the webinar was the Okefenokee. We have a great update to share on the Okefenokee.
We do. Our colleagues do not time their successes for these webinars, but this worked out really well. So folks who were able to join us last year would have seen a great presentation about our work to defend the Okefenokee Swamp, National Wildlife Refuge, from a proposal to mine titanium from the ridge that keeps all the water in the swamp. This is what makes it a swamp. It was a disastrous idea. And I'm happy to report that recently that mine proposal has been abandoned. The mine site is going to go to a conservation owner so that it won't happen there again. And what I really love about this project, aside from just, pride for the great work our Georgia colleagues did, the whole team did, is it is such a wonderful example of our theory of change, how we get results at SCLC, because for sure there was some brilliant lawyering involved here. And, often we set out on a legal path, we have a plan, the situation changes, we have to be innovative, echo something new. That certainly happened here, but also a powerful grassroots coalition. There were so many smart, dedicated people working with us. We were learning from them. We were contributing our effort to that coalition. lobbying and advocacy before state agencies and federal agencies, the state legislature, the federal legislature, a relentless public communications campaign. And what we know is that it's all those tools working in tandem and feeding off each other and having the tactical experience to really make the most of them that gets a result like this against what seemed really long odds at the beginning. And it's just, I just think it's a really compelling example of how we get results, and really happy to be able to report to folks.
Well, and some of the polling we saw on that was like 80% of people in Georgia want to protect the Okefenokee. So as we think about whether we're polarized, there are still these places that bring us together. It makes me think of this other refuge work we've been doing in eastern North Carolina. So Lake Mattamuskeet National Wildlife Refuge is less well known than the Okefenokee, but Lake Mattamuskeet is an incredible place. It's the largest natural freshwater lake in North Carolina, and it is a wildlife refuge because it is home to, during the winter, it is home to more than 100,000 migratory birds. If you go out there in the winter, you're going to see small migratory birds, but you're also going to see these an incredible diversity of ducks, up to huge birds, tundra swans that can be 25 pounds. And when they take off, it fills the sky. It's a remarkable sight to see. And so you would think in a refuge that is designed to protect birds, you would protect birds. But what happened was the Fish and Wildlife Service approved a proposal to use a toxic chemical, a chemical to kill algae in a lake. The chemical is toxic to birds. They tested it, it kills birds. So we challenge that. We do, because each refuge has a purpose, and Mattamuskeet's purpose is to protect migratory birds. So we challenge that, and just last week we got a decision from the federal court in eastern North Carolina overturning that decision, ruling for our clients, and ending that dangerous experiment.
That's great. And a powerful example, you read a lot in the news about environmental law, environmental permit form. There's environmental law working, right? A lobbyist got money to try this in the wrong place, and environmental law worked and got to a much better outcome.
Right. Well, and then another example, I was coming up from Chapel Hill yesterday to our office here in Charlottesville, and coming the route I took took me right through Pennsylvania County, which is where we had a great win that didn't rely on these big environmental laws, but instead relied on local power.
Absolutely, yeah. I said in the introduction that part of our theory of change, part of what is going to get us to a better place in the long run, is reminding folks in the South, in our communities, what we have in common. And this is such a powerful example of that. So the project in question was a proposal to build the second largest methane gas power plant in America in Pennsylvania County. More shocking still, this was not to serve the power needs of folks in Virginia or of that county. It was going to be a private power plant to power an as yet unnamed data center. It was a speculative project. And the people of the county did not want it. And so this ended up being a question of local determination, what that community wanted it for itself. It ended up being a dispute in front of a local planning board. Our colleagues were there from Virginia, the Virginia office, making the legal case, making the factual case for why this was the wrong thing for the county. But also there in that room was this big grassroots coalition of neighbors from that county. And so you had people who, like us, are very passionate about the disastrous climate change impacts of a big fossil fuel power plant in Pennsylvania. But you also just had folks who loved their community, who would never have identified themselves as environmentalists or conservationists or climate change activists. But they all had common cause in that moment. And that community upwelling led the county planning board to deny the rezoning. That proposal has been abandoned. And to my point earlier, that's a community with now an infrastructure and connections where we've stood side by side and we've reminded each other that we have more in common with each other than we do with politicians and talking heads from hundreds of miles away, which I just think is so important. So we do have time for some of the questions that you all presented to us. Jeff, you have the first one.
I'll kick it off. So obviously we've talked a lot about litigation. One of the questions is, can litigation still make a difference if the administration ignores the courts?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, as you can imagine, going around talking to people. And for good reason. I mean, the news is very concerning. And I make a couple points to folks when I hear this. The first is to remember that in poll after poll after poll, 85% of Americans and more report that they expect the federal government to comply with federal court orders. Americans do not want to live in a lawless society. They do not want to live in a country where the government is unaccountable to the law, and they know that. And the White House knows that. The administration knows that. And you see that in what they're doing. So the other thing I remind people, it's very important, particularly with this administration, to watch their feet. Don't listen to what they say. So you'll hear very concerning statements from folks very high up in the administration saying just indefensible things about the courts, questioning the integrity of the legal system, questioning the integrity of judges, suggesting that maybe we just don't have to comply with it. When you watch what they're actually doing, their lawyers are going into court and being lawyers. And they're coming up with legalistic excuses why they're not violating court orders. Well, the jurisdiction wasn't quite right, or the timing was out, or we read it differently. And that's not okay. I'm not suggesting that that's an acceptable place to be, but that's a very different place to be than an administration saying, actually ignoring court orders. The courts made their order, let them enforce it, because then you do live in a lawless society. The fact that they feel the need to make those legalistic arguments means we are still in this fight. And the good news is the courts are doing their job across the country. You'll read news stories that report, a judge appointed by president, whoever. Don't pay too much attention to that, because without regard to political affiliation and across the political spectrum, trial courts, courts of appeals are standing up for the rule of law across the nation. You can find outliers. You always have been able to. For sure, the Supreme Court is concerning right now, but they take 80 cases a year. And most of the things you care about in the South are happening in front of a trial court, in front of the Court of Appeals. I feel silly saying this sometimes, but this really is a magic trick. Our democracy holds, our courts, the rule of law holds if we all believe it does and insist on it. We just cannot allow the news to convince us that this administration is not accountable to the rule of law. We cannot let the administration convince us that they are above the rule of law, and SELC won't. Next question is for you, Jeff. What can we expect the Trump administration to focus on next?
Well, I'll touch on one of the things that we've already discussed, and that's data centers. Last week they put out this AI action plan, and the president signed several executive orders on AI. And AI is powered by data centers, which are large warehouses that provide the computing firepower to make AI and the internet work. And so we need them. They're important, but we have to do them the right way, because these facilities can be very big. As you mentioned, the one in Pennsylvania County was going to be powered by the second largest gas plant in the country. One proposed right now in Bessemer, Alabama, has 18 buildings the size of Walmart supercenters. So enormous facilities. Extremely energy intensive, and they also use an immense amount of water. They can use as much water as a small town. And so if we don't plan them right, if we don't power them through clean, renewable energy, if we don't make sure that we're paying attention to how the water is being used, we run the risk of putting our communities in real trouble, both with higher bills, no water, and changing the character of the community, which is what we saw in Pennsylvania County. Now, this administration has said, we don't want to hear any of that. We don't want the states getting in the way. We don't want local governments getting in the way. We certainly don't want the public getting in the way. And so that's what you see in these executive orders last week in this AI action plan, is an effort to really force these things on communities that may or may not want them. The next question is for you. We've talked some about climate. Obviously, this administration is trying to take the federal government out of climate. Stop all climate change work in the federal government. What can be done at the state level?
Yeah, well, for sure, things are changing at the federal level. We've been working very hard to get the climate money out of the federal government and into the South. We pivoted hard to litigate, to defend those resources. But the truth is the heart of our climate change strategy in the South has always been state focused. You touched on this, one of the biggest challenges we face for the South being a major contributor to climate change is just the business model of our southern utilities, who make their money by building polluting power plants. And we've been working on that for years. The solution to that problem is here in the South, and state legislatures in front of the regulators, the state regulators for these utilities. And for us, that takes the shape of fighting this gas infrastructure build out, addressing these data centers, facilitating the siting of solar facilities, breaking down barriers to renewables. So all of that has been happening here in the South before the Trump administration. It's going to continue happening in the next, for the next couple of years. Another big contributor to climate change in the South is our daily commutes, our driving around. And that work we have been doing for years. That is about encouraging rail for freight. It is about making sure we provide transit and multimodal options. Again, that's all happening in our local communities. That's happening at the state level. It will continue happening for the next couple of years. The third big part of our climate strategy is just recognizing the fact that we're not preventing climate change anymore. It's here. We're mitigating its worst effects, and we're getting ready for what's coming. And that work to make our communities more resilient is hyperlocal. Often, it certainly is at the state level. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. We're working with folks in that community to rebuild smarter. We're working in Charleston to deal with rising seas, and that is grassroots work at local governments, and that is state lobbying. So we're going to continue making climate progress in the South over the coming years. And in truth, well, everything happening in the federal government is terrible. We're really in a strong position to keep making that progress despite what's happening at the federal level. Right. Jeff, our next question: how can you find hope right now with so much under attack?
Hope is a funny word, and we don't hear it very often right now. But I've mentioned to you in the past, I went back and read Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, and he used hope in the middle of a civil war. And I think that was on purpose, and I think it's important that we keep talking about it. I'm going to suggest, and what I encourage our staff to do, is to really lean into a place that you might not expect. And that is, if you find headlines that are distressing, if you see news that really keeps you up at night, focus in on those one or two things to find out what matters most, what is most important to you, and then go find people in your community who are working on it. Because hope is really the combination of a belief that a better future is out there and the work to bring that better future forward. We get to do that every day. If we want to see smart people engaged in work to build a better future, all we have to do is walk outside of our offices. We see it in our staff, we see it with our partners. And that's what can get lost if we only read the headlines. So I think it's critical for people out there to tap into our networks, join us, join our partners, and because there are millions of us out here. There are millions of us out here working to build a better future, and that doesn't always show up in the headlines. So if you want to know where I find hope, it's in doing the work, getting to be around people who not only see what's happening, but are responding to it.
Yeah, that's well said. That's the right message to wrap up on. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. And thank you for joining us. As I hope that you have drawn from this some of the hope that Jeff and I get the opportunity to draw from working with our colleagues every day, and gotten some insight into why we're confident we're going to continue making progress across the South. We find renewal and for that hope by engaging in the work. There's lots of opportunities for you to get engaged as well. Please watch decisions happening in your community. Reach out to your leaders. Tell them you expect them to stand up for the environment. Support strong leaders who are strongly supportive of environmental protections. And you can learn more about everything you heard today and other issues we're working on at our website at selc.org. And keep an eye out for an email from us in the coming week. We're going to send around a link to a recording of this webinar, and also some information on opportunities to take advocacy action on some of the issues you heard about today. Finally, please consider supporting our work. Jeff and I and Sarah and George are just a small group of a big team of dedicated advocates that are working hard every day, working today, to stand up to the Trump administration and to make environmental progress. That work has never felt more immediate, more urgent, and your support for it has never been more important or more timely. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks for all you do, and have a great afternoon.